So let's go back to some positive news. The Prime Minister has been moved from the intensive care unit where he has spent the last 3 nights at St Thomas's Hospital. We can cross over to our correspondent there, Keith Doyle, who joins us live now. Keith, with this news breaking in the past hour or so, what do we know, Keith?
Yes, well, we have been given a statement from Downing Street to say that the Prime Minister has now left the intensive care unit. The statement from Downing Street says that the Prime Minister has been moved back this evening from intensive care back to the ward where he will receive close monitoring during the early phase of his recovery. And the statement went on to say that he is in extremely good spirits. Of course, the key word in there is the early phase of his recovery. So clearly he has passed that point of danger, that point that we're all worried about, that he was in intensive care for. He's now out of intensive care and his recovery has begun. He was brought to the hospital here in central London last Sunday. And then he was brought into intensive care on Monday night. So we spent 3 nights in intensive care. Now, we did hear throughout through various government briefings over the last few days, certainly this morning or this afternoon, Dominic Raab, who's the Foreign Secretary, of course, deputising for the Prime Minister, he said that he was in good spirits and that he was taking steps towards his recovery. And of course, this news coming tonight, just in the last hour, that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has now been moved out of intensive care and is back in the ward, where, in the words of a spokesperson, said that he will receive close monitoring during the early phase of his recovery. And we've had some reaction to that. The President Trump has tweeted that great news, Boris Johnson is out of intensive care, and he ends his text by saying, or he ends his tweet by saying, "Get well, Boris."
And it's really good, it's positive to hear that the Prime Minister is in extremely good spirits. Just a few moments ago, we of course had the clap for key workers for the NHS. These are pictures that were taking place about 8 or so minutes ago. The Prime Minister himself, Keith, took part in this last week when this happened. This is now becoming a bit of a ritual every Thursday evening at 8 o'clock UK time. So this time he was in the hands of the NHS. The government always very keen to stress that he is receiving excellent care, and we heard that message on Monday when he was first admitted into intensive care, and now we know that he has been moved from intensive care, but he does remain on the ward at St Thomas's.
Yes, well, of course, it was last Thursday night when the whole of the UK came out to clap for the NHS, for the National Health Service, that we saw those pictures of Boris Johnson on the steps in Downing Street, standing alone, clapping for the NHS. And indeed, I mean, to most observers, he did not look well in those pictures. He really felt that it certainly looked like he was not making the type of recovery that everyone would have hoped for. And of course, it was just a few days later that he was taken here to St Thomas's Hospital. So yes, that good news tonight, within the last hour, that statement coming from Downing Street to say that the Prime Minister has been moved back this evening from intensive care back into the ward where he'll receive close monitoring during the early phase of his recovery. So clearly the recovery of the Prime Minister from coronavirus has begun.
Good news. Thank you so much, Keith. Keith Doyle there outside St Thomas's Hospital in central London, where the Prime Minister has been moved from intensive care.